Every month, or every 2 weeks if you're lucky, money shows up in your bank account, and we call it a salary. It's such a normal word that we almost never question it. Salary feels modern, corporate, and tied to spreadsheets, contracts, and HR emails. But the word itself is ancient, and its origin has nothing to do with offices, computers, or even coins. In fact, the story of salary begins long before paper money existed, back when one of the most valuable substances on Earth wasn't gold or silver, but salt. The same thing sitting quietly on your kitchen table once shaped economies, controlled trade routes, and gave birth to the word we still use to describe how we get paid today. So today, we're uncovering how salt turned into salary, and why we still use that word thousands of years later, right here, on History of Simple Things. It's hard to imagine now, but for most of human history, salt wasn't cheap or easy to get. Before refrigeration, salt was essential for preserving food. It kept meat from rotting, allowed armies to march long distances, and helped entire civilizations survive harsh winters. Without salt, food spoiled quickly, and people suffered from serious health problems. Because of this, salt became incredibly valuable. Entire trade networks were built around it, and some of the world's oldest roads existed primarily to transport salt from mines and coastal regions into cities. In many places, salt was tightly controlled by governments, taxed heavily, and treated almost like currency. If you had salt, you had power. This is where the word salary starts to take shape. In ancient Rome, soldiers were among the most important workers in the empire. They protected borders, enforced laws, and expanded Roman territory. To keep them loyal and functional, they had to be compensated reliably. While Roman soldiers were paid in coins, part of their compensation was often tied to salt, or money specifically meant to buy salt. The Latin word salarium referred to this allowance. It comes from sal, the Latin word for salt. Over time, salarium didn't just mean salt money, it became a broader term for payment given in exchange for service. Salt was so essential to a soldier's survival that tying pay to it made perfect sense. There's a popular myth that Roman soldiers were literally paid with salt, but that's not entirely accurate. They were paid in money, not sacks of salt. However, that money was closely linked to salt's value and importance. Salt allowances or stipends were critical, and missing them could cause real hardship. Over time, the idea of compensation connected to salt became symbolic rather than literal. The word salarium stuck around even as payment systems evolved. What mattered wasn't the salt itself, but the concept. Reliable pay that allowed a worker to meet basic needs. That idea survived long after salt stopped being rare. As the Roman Empire faded and Europe moved through the Middle Ages, the word evolved along with language itself. Salarium passed into Old French as salaire, and eventually into English as salary. By then, the original connection to salt was mostly forgotten. Salary simply meant fixed compensation for work, especially regular ongoing service. Unlike daily wages or piece-based pay, a salary implied stability. It meant you belonged to an organization or authority that expected your continued labor. Even though salt was no longer part of the equation, the word carried centuries of meaning about survival, loyalty, and structured work. Interestingly, the word salary still feels different from wages, and that's not an accident. Wages traditionally referred to pay for manual or hourly labor, while salary became associated with long-term roles, responsibility, and trust. A salaried worker wasn't just paid for time, They were paid for their role. This distinction echoes the Roman idea of supporting someone so they could continue serving without constantly worrying about basic survival. Even today, when someone moves from hourly wages to a salary, it's often seen as a milestone, a sign of stability, status, or professional growth. Salary isn't the only word that remembers salt's importance. The phrase "worth your salt" comes from the same idea, someone who earns their keep. Even the word salad traces back to salted vegetables. These linguistic leftovers remind us how deeply salt shaped human life. While it's cheap and abundant now, its historical value left permanent marks on how we talk about work, value, and compensation. Language, in a way, preserves history better than monuments. So every time you hear the word salary, you're actually hearing an echo from ancient kitchens, Roman roads, and military camps. You're hearing a reminder of a time when survival depended on minerals pulled from the earth and traded like treasure. What began as a practical allowance for soldiers slowly transformed into one of the most common financial terms in the modern world. The salt is gone, the coins have changed, and the jobs look nothing like they did 2,000 years ago. But the word remains. The story of salary is a perfect example of how ordinary words carry extraordinary histories. We say them without thinking, yet they connect us directly to ancient economies and human struggles that shape the world we live in now. It's a small reminder that even the most boring-sounding terms, like payroll or compensation, can have origins rooted in survival, power, and something as simple as salt. And that's what makes the history of simple things so fascinating. The past is hiding in plain sight, right inside the words we use every day. The next time your paycheck comes in, you'll know you're holding a tiny piece of ancient history, a word born from salt, survival, and centuries of human labor. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.